Bandage donut. Holding one end of the triangular bandage, roll it several times around one hand until reaching the midpoint, leaving a hole at the center. At the midway the circle formation, hold the loose end of the triangular bandage and in spiral motion, wrap the circle until a donut secured on all sides is formed. Wound on top of the head. Apply a dressing on top of the head. Use an open-faced cravat with the base folded outward. Place the middle part of the base on the forehead just above the eyebrow. Wrap slowly the circumference of the head with an open-faced bandage anchoring at the base of the skull until both ends meet and overlap. Pull both ends of the cravat towards the center of the forehead and tie together using a square knot. Make sure that the bandage does not cover the eyes and ears and insert ends. Wound on the forehead. Apply a dressing over the wound. Wrap the narrow cravat horizontally over the forehead with the apex placed over the dressing. Wrap slowly the circumference of the head with an open-faced bandage anchoring at the base of the skull until both ends meet and overlap. Wound on the forehead. Apply a dressing over the wound. Wrap the narrow cravat horizontally over the forehead with the apex placed over the dressing. Wrap slowly the circumference of the head with an open-faced bandage anchoring at the base of the skull until both ends meet and overlap. Bring both ends of the cravat at the center of the forehead and tie them together using a square knot, making sure that the bandage does not cover the eyes and ears. Injuries on the ear, cheek, and jaw. Hold the dressing in place with one hand. Wrap the open-faced cravat vertically over the wound. The top side end covers the top of the head. The bottom side covers the chin until both ends cross at the opposite cheek at the level above the ear. Bandaging a wound on the lateral neck. Apply and secure a dressing on top of the wound. Place the apex of a narrow bandage on top of the wound covering the dressing. Run the bandage across the shoulders. Apply pads on the armpit. Cross the bandage until it reaches the opposite sides of the armpit. Wound on the shoulder. Apply and secure a dressing on the wound. Step 2. Using a semi-broad cravat, place one end on the chest opposite the injured shoulder and run it across the chest covering the wound. Wound on the forearm. Place and secure a dressing on the wound and apply pressure. Apply a narrow cravat diagonally on the wound with the apex as a point of reference. Clavicular fracture on the shoulder. This bandaging technique, otherwise known as underarm sling, is used to immobilize the limb adjacent to a fractured shoulder. This requires the use of two bandages, one open face and one semi-broad cravat. Wrap the body starting from the back horizontally using a semi-broad cravat with both ends meeting at the center for additional support. Check for pulse, motor reflex, and sensation. Wound on the arm. Place and secure a dressing on the wound. Using a narrow cravat, apply the apex part on top of the wound. Pull both ends of the cravat and crisscross. Wound on the elbow, straight. Apply and secure a dressing on the wound. Using a narrow cravat, apply the apex part on top of the wound. Pull both ends of the cravat and crisscross. Wound on the elbow. Bend it. This technique is necessary to cover the wound in a victim with his elbow in bended position when found. This is a two-man technique whereby the first rescuer serves to stabilize the affected limb while the second rescuer applies the bandage. Close palm bandaging for horizontal wounds. This bandaging technique requires that fingers are left uncovered when applying a bandage on the hand. Open palm bandaging for vertical wounds. Instruct the victim to open his palm with the thumb extended upward. Apply a dressing. Place a narrow cravat with the apex directly on top of the wound diagonally. Roll the loose end on the thumb side such that it can overlap to create the second layer. Roll the loose end on the small finger such that it will create the third layer. Unilateral wound in the chest. Apply pressure and dressing on the wound. Place the triangular bandage over the chest with the apex lying on the side of the wound. Roll the base outwards, then tie the ends together with the square knot. Unilateral wound at the back. Apply pressure and dressing on the wound. Place the triangular bandage at the back with the apex lying on the side of the wound. Roll the base in an outward and upward motion, then tie the ends together with a square knot. Bilateral wound on the chest. This bandaging technique requires the use of two bandages to cover large wounds of the chest. Prepare bandages by binding one open and one semi-broad cravat together on the apex area. Apply the bandages on the chest, leaving the upper ends hanging at the back. Tie both ends at the back and make a square knot. Injury in the genitals version 1. This bandaging technique is necessary in covering the injuries in the genitals. Hang the semi-broad cravat at the apex of the narrow cravat. Pull one end of the semi-broad cravat going to the back, then tie it to the loose end of the narrow cravat, making a square knot. Repeat step 5 for the other end. Injury in the genitals version 2. This is another technique in covering the injuries in the genitals. Apply and secure the dressing on the injured genital. Hang the semi-broad cravat on top of the square knot of the narrow cravat, making sure that the knot ends are exposed. Pull one end of the semi-broad cravat and wrap it around the inguinal area. Make a square knot by tying the end of the semi-broad cravat and one end of the square knot. Repeat the steps 5 and 6 for the other end of the semi-broad cravat. Wound on the hips. The bandaging on the hips is necessary to control bleeding and to keep the dressing in place for the protection of the wound. Apply and secure the dressing on the wound. Using a semi-broad bandage, place one end on the anterior side of the lower abdomen opposite the injured hip and run the bandage until it covers the wound. Thigh with impaled object. This bandaging technique is used to cover a body part, for example, the thigh with impaled object. This requires the use of 2 narrow cravats and 1 donut. This is a two-man technique where one serves to assist in securing the stability of the impaled object and the other one to apply the bandage. Wound on bended knees. This bandaging technique is necessary to cover the wound in a victim with his knees in bended position when found. This is a two-man technique whereby the first serves to stabilize the affected limb while the second applies the bandage. 2 semi-broad cravats will be used in this technique. 2 opposite ends of the semi-broad cravats will be tied using a square knot. Wound on one leg. This bandaging technique applies the spiral method of bandaging. This is a two-man technique where the first serves to stabilize the injured leg and the other one to apply the bandage. Place and secure a dressing on the wound. Using a semi-broad cravat, apply the apex part on top of the wound. Ankle sprain with shoe on. This bandaging technique is used to immobilize a sprained ankle. This requires the use of a narrow cravat. Place the apex of the cravat at the upper part on the sole of the shoe, just beneath the toes, extending both ends of the cravat at the back of the ankle. Wrap around both ends and crisscross in front of the ankle. Insert ends on each side of the ankle under the cravat. Ankle sprain with shoe off. This bandaging technique is used to immobilize a sprained ankle. Place the apex part of the cravat horizontally above the foot. Pass both ends of the cravat to the sole, bringing both ends upward. Cross both ends of the cravat behind the ankle. Bring both ends around the top of the foot, then crisscross and insert each end beneath the bandage on both sides of the ankle. An arm sling is a bandage suspended from the neck to support an upper extremity. This sling is used for injuries of the forearm and elbow. Step 1. With the victim's injured limb flexed in front of the chest, insert an open face bandage using a sliding motion. Check for pulse, motor reflex, and sensation. Cuff sling. The cuff sling is used to limit the movement of the shoulder joints and the upper limbs. Place the narrow cravat diagonally with the apex on top of the forearm. Wrap the distal end and insert underneath the bandage. Wrap the proximal end and insert underneath the bandage.